Hi, welcome to week 7 of the chronological reading of the New Testament. Following their sharp disagreement, Paul and Barnabas parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. That's how Acts 15 ends. This week we'll read Acts chapters 16, 17 and 18. These chapters tell the story of Paul's second church planting trip that begins in the early 50s AD with the express purpose of strengthening the churches that were planted by Paul and Barnabas on their first journey, as well as starting new congregations in Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea and Athens and Corinth. Paul's travelling companion is Silas, who's also referred to as Silvanus in some translations of the Bible. He was a teacher and a prophet and is considered to have been one of Jesus' 72 disciples. Silas was of Greek Jewish birth and was also a Roman citizen. He's listed as a co-author of the 2 letters to the Thessalonians, along with Paul and Timothy, and he also co-authored 1 Peter, is mentioned as a faithful brother by the apostle. On this second church planting journey, Paul and Silas took with them the letter that was written as a result of the Jerusalem Council, the message recorded in Acts 15. As a result of this communication and visit, the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in their numbers. On leaving Antioch, they would visit Paul's hometown of Tarsus, then on to Derbe and Lystra. It's at Lystra that they are reacquainted with Timothy, who now became an important part of Paul's apostolic team. Timothy was converted on Paul's first visit to Lystra, along with his mother Eunice and grandma Lois. His mother was Jewish, but his father was a Greek man who, as far as we know, did not become a Christian. For that reason, Timothy had not been circumcised. In 2 Timothy 1:5, Paul writes, "I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also." Because of his Jewish heritage, it was important that Timothy be circumcised so as not to be a hindrance to Jewish people acknowledging Jesus as their Messiah. After being circumcised, the leadership team of the church at Lystra, along with Paul and Silas, laid their hands on Timothy to commission him for his church planting and pastoral work. Paul gives insight into this in 1 and 2 Timothy. "Do not neglect your gift, which was given you through a prophetic message when the body of elders laid their hands on you. Timothy, my son, I give you this instruction in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by following them you may fight the good fight. For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands." Timothy helped Paul to establish churches at Philippi, Thessalonica and Berea. When Paul left Berea to go to Athens, he left Timothy and Silas behind, but subsequently sent word for them to join him. Timothy was later sent back to Thessalonica to strengthen and encourage the church in their faith. Acts 16 records the famous they, we and us passages. Remembering that Luke wrote Acts, read Acts 16:7 and notice how Luke refers to Paul, Silas and Timothy as they. Then the 3 men came to a town called Troas, where Paul has a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." In response to this vision, notice Acts 16:10, where Luke writes, "After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them." In other words, Luke lived in Troas and now joined Paul, Silas and Timothy in planting the church in Philippi. At the end of Acts 16, Luke writes, "After Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house, where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them. Then they left." In other words, Luke stayed in Philippi to look after the new church. The Philippian church would go on to become the gateway for the gospel to be preached throughout Europe. The next stop was Thessalonica, Macedonia's largest port, about 160 kilometers southwest of Philippi. According to Philippians 4, verses 15 and 16, the church in Philippi started financially supporting Paul's church planting ministry straight away. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. But even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. When persecution rose again, the apostles left Thessalonica and headed to Berea, where the people considered carefully what they learned from Paul before truly believing what he said. We would do well to check everything we hear by examining the scriptures every day to see if what is being said is true. In Acts 17, Paul quotes two famous Greek philosophers, Aratus and Epimenides, in order to point people to Jesus, the one true God. In the 6th century BC, when the poet Epimenides lived, there was a plague which went throughout all of Greece. The Greeks thought they must have offended one of their gods, so they began offering sacrifices on altars to all the various gods they knew. When nothing worked, they figured there must be a god they didn't know about, whom they must somehow appease. So Epimenides came up with a plan. He released hungry sheep into the countryside and instructed men to follow the sheep to see where they would lie down. He believed that since hungry sheep would not naturally lie down but continue to graze, if the sheep were to lie down, it would be a sign from God that this place was sacred. At each spot where the sheep tired and laid down, the Athenians built an altar and sacrificed the sheep on it. Afterward, it's believed the plague stopped, which they attributed to this unknown God accepting their sacrifice. Paul tried to convey to them that the unknown God was the true God, Jesus Christ, the God who created all things and every person. He then goes on to give a gentle but firm rebuke of man-made religion. It is of man's design, and Paul refers to it as ignorance that once God overlooked, but no longer. God is not looking for our religion, he's interested in a relationship. His desire is that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. More importantly, God has already reached out to us in the tangible person of Jesus Christ. From Athens, Paul went to Corinth, the most beautiful, modern and industrious city of its size in Greece. With the exception of Ephesus, he stayed at Corinth longer than any other city. It was at Corinth that Paul meets a Jew named Achaia, a native of Pontus who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla because the Emperor Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. The Emperor Claudius was in office from AD 41 to 54, and so this fits perfectly with the chronology of Acts 18. The Roman historian Suetonius reports that Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome because they were rioting on account of someone named Christus, or Christ, apparently referring to disputes between Christian and non-Christian Jews. The Jews were ordered to leave Rome around 52 AD. Priscilla and Achaia are mentioned 6 times in the New Testament. They're portrayed as a husband and wife team who loved Jesus and carried out an amazing pastoral ministry in a number of churches, including Corinth, Ephesus, and Rome. After 18 months apparently leaving Silas in Corinth to take care of the church, Paul, along with Priscilla and Achaia, set sail for Ephesus, where they pioneered a church. Ephesus was the 4th greatest city in the world after Rome, Alexandria in Egypt, and Antioch in Syria. Paul left Priscilla and Achaia in Ephesus to care for the fledgling church while he made his way back to Antioch, where he spent some time before once again setting out to strengthen the churches of Galatia and Phrygia. Chapter 18 ends with the introduction of a man who would become one of the most eloquent teachers of God's Word in the New Testament, an Egyptian named Apollos. Even though he was well versed in scriptures, his knowledge of the gospel was incomplete. I love the way Priscilla and Achaia humbly take him to their home and explain to him the way of God more adequately. We would do well to imitate this humble approach rather than to publicly correct people on social media or in front of others. Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, the province that included the cities of Corinth and Athens, and was sent there with the blessing of the Ephesian church leaders. He was a great help to the Corinthian church and was especially effective in their outreach amongst the Jewish population. Most references to Apollos are in 1 Corinthians, so it seems that he based himself on the leadership team in that church for quite some time. Enjoy your reading of these 3 amazing chapters of Acts this week.